At 75, she was alone. Every Christmas, until she quietly built a whole new life. If you enjoy stories about second chances and people who finally choose themselves, hit like on this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. Annie was 75 years old, and for most of those years, she had been alone. She had raised her children with everything she had. She had given up things for them without ever once complaining. But somewhere along the way, being their mother had turned into being an afterthought in their lives. They only called when they needed something, a little money, a favor, someone to watch the grandkids on short notice. Annie always said yes. She always would have said yes, but no one ever called just to ask how she was doing. Money had always been tight. Annie counted every penny, clipped every coupon, and made do with what little she had. It wasn't that she minded simple living. What she minded was doing it completely alone. Christmas had once been the brightest part of her year. When her children were small, she used to spend weeks preparing for Christmas Eve dinner. The table would be set with her good dishes, the ones she only used once a year. The house would smell like cinnamon and roasted turkey. Her children's laughter would fill every room. It was, for a few hours each December, everything she had ever wanted her life to be. But her children grew up, married, and started families of their own. And slowly, one small compromise at a time, Christmas Eve dinner stopped being at Annie's table. First, it moved to accommodate one daughter-in-law's family traditions, then another. Eventually, Annie wasn't hosting anymore. She was just being invited, when she was invited at all, to sit quietly at someone else's table and watch someone else's Christmas happen around her. Every year she told herself it did not matter where the dinner was held, as long as her family was together. She kept telling herself that even as the invitations grew more infrequent, even as her seat at the table moved further from the center, even as her grandchildren stopped asking her to help set the plates the way they used to, she told herself a lot of things over the years to make the loneliness easier to carry. Most of them were not true. This particular Christmas, Annie sat alone in her small house, the one she had lived in for decades and had, if she was honest with herself, come to hate. The silence in that house on Christmas Eve was heavier than any silence she had ever known. No phone calls, no visitors. Just Annie, a cup of tea gone cold, and the quiet hum of a refrigerator in an otherwise empty kitchen. Something inside her shifted that night. She decided, right there in that chair, that she was done. Done waiting. Done being poor, done being an afterthought in her own family's life. The only problem was, she had no idea how to change any of it. Annie was old, but she was not foolish. She had spent a lifetime learning how to do things. She could cook from scratch, sew a hem, grow a garden, stretch a grocery budget further than most people thought possible. But none of those skills, as far as she knew, could put real money in her pocket. Not enough to change anything. Then she remembered the old computer sitting in her hallway closet. Her son had given it to her years earlier, mostly so she would have something to keep her occupied, something to play a few simple games on so she would stop calling him so often. She had barely touched it since. That night, Annie pulled the computer out of the closet, blew the dust off it, and set it up on her kitchen table. She did not know the first thing about how to use it. She pressed buttons slowly, half expecting the thing to break under her hands. But she was determined, and determination, it turned out, was something Annie had never been short on. Within a few weeks, she had the internet connected in her home. She signed up for a free computer class for seniors at the local library, the kind of class she might have laughed off a year earlier out of pride. She showed up every week, sat in the front row, and took notes like a schoolgirl. The instructor, a patient young woman not much older than Annie's own grandchildren, seemed surprised at how many questions Annie asked, and how quickly she understood the answers. To her own surprise, it all came naturally to her. Within a short time, she could figure out almost anything she needed to know just by trying it herself, clicking around until something made sense, and writing down what she learned so she would not forget it. She kept a little notebook by the computer, filled with her own handwriting, Notes on things like how to upload a photograph or how to fix her internet when it stopped working. She was proud of that notebook in a way she had not expected to be proud of anything in a long time. She started small. She began writing short posts online about everyday things. How to get a stubborn stain out of a white shirt. How to make a pot roast that actually turned out tender. Simple, practical things Annie had known how to do her entire life. The kind of things she assumed everyone already knew. Apparently they didn't. Annie could hardly believe how quickly people started following what she wrote. Within months, she had thousands of people reading her posts, asking her questions in the comments, thanking her for advice that had actually helped them. Annie spent hours every day answering those comments one by one, the same patient way she used to answer her children's questions when they were young. Except now, people were actually listening. After a few months, the money started coming in. It was small at first, a few dollars here and there. But it was hers, earned by her own hands and her own knowledge, and every bit of it felt different from any dollar she had ever counted before. Annie did not tell her children any of this. They had made it clear, over years of missed calls and empty holidays, that they had their own lives, and that her life was not something they were particularly interested in, so she let them keep believing nothing had changed. It took less than a year for Annie's small blog to start making real money. Good money. Money that made her stop and ask herself, for what felt like the first time in decades, what she actually wanted out of the rest of her life. She knew one thing for certain. She did not want to spend whatever years she had left sitting in that small house, waiting for visits from children who were never going to come. So Annie started researching homes for sale along the coast. She had always loved the ocean, even though she had rarely had the money or the time to see it. Late one night, scrolling through listing after listing, she found it. A house with a wide front porch and a view straight out over the water. It felt somehow like it was already hers. She called the real estate agent the next morning and made an offer, sight unseen. Because it was a cash offer, the sale closed within weeks. Annie packed exactly one suitcase, left the rest of her old life behind in that small house, and drove toward the coast to start over. The house was even more beautiful than the photographs had shown. Annie stayed in a nearby hotel for a couple of weeks while she slowly bought furniture, piece by piece, choosing only things she genuinely liked. No hand-me-downs, no leftovers from someone else's life. For the first time, everything in her home was something she had chosen for herself. Annie kept working on her blog every day, usually until about 4 in the afternoon. Then she would pour herself a tall glass of sweet tea from a pitcher she kept in the refrigerator, carry it out to her front porch, and sit watching the waves roll in. It became her favorite part of the day. Before long, her new neighbors started stopping by to introduce themselves. A wave from the porch turned into a short conversation by the mailbox, which turned into an invitation for tea, which turned into real friendships, the kind Annie had not had time or energy for in years. There was Marilyn from 2 houses down, a retired schoolteacher who brought over a coffee cake the very first week and stayed for 2 hours talking about nothing in particular. There was a younger couple across the street who had just had their first baby, and who Annie found herself watching from time to time, the way she used to watch her own children when they were small. There was an older widower named Harold who walked his dog past her porch every evening and had, somewhere along the way, started stopping to chat for a few minutes before continuing on. None of them knew about her family. None of them needed to. They simply knew Annie, the woman on the porch with the sweet tea, and that seemed to be enough for them. For the first time in a long time, Annie felt like she belonged somewhere. Not because of who she used to be to someone else, but simply because of who she was. One afternoon, sitting on her porch with a neighbor, an idea came to her. She wanted to host a real Christmas Eve dinner again, the kind she used to host when her children were small. Her good dishes, a full table, laughter filling the house. Annie ordered decorations online, and within days her home was glowing, inside and out, with lights and greenery and all the little touches she had missed for so many years. She invited her new friends to Christmas Eve dinner, and every single one of them accepted. For the first time in a long time, Annie found herself genuinely excited for the holiday. Somehow, word got back to her children. They discovered her blog, saw the following she had built, and started asking around about where their mother had moved to. Eventually, the real estate agent who had handled the sale of her old house mentioned that Annie had relocated to the Arn coast. 3 days before Christmas, her children showed up at her front door, suitcases in hand, clearly expecting to spend the holiday with her. Annie invited them inside. She served them coffee and their favorite dessert, the same recipe I used to make every year when they were young. And then, calmly and politely, she told them the truth. There was no room at her table this year. She was hosting a dinner for her new friends, the people who had shown up for her when her own family had not. She told them, gently but firmly, to go home and enjoy Christmas with their in-laws, the way they had chosen to for so many years already. Maybe, she told them, they could plan a family Christmas together next year, or maybe not. Her children left quietly, without much argument. Perhaps they understood, somewhere underneath their surprise, that they had no real grounds to object. Perhaps they simply did not know what to say to the mother they had not truly seen in years. That evening, Annie's porch and dining room filled with the sound of real laughter again. Marilyn arrived first, carrying a pie and a bottle of wine. Harold came next, dressed a little more formally than usual, with his dog waiting patiently outside on the porch. One by one, her new friends arrived, filling her home with the warmth and noise she had spent so many Christmases without. They sat around Annie's good dishes, the ones she had packed carefully in that single suitcase and unpacked with her own 2 hands in her new home. The table was full. The conversation was easy. Nobody rushed off early to be somewhere else. Nobody made her feel like an obligation to be worked around. Annie sat at the head of her own table, looked out at the faces around her, and out past them to the dark ocean beyond her porch windows, and felt something she had not felt in longer than she could remember. She felt like her life belonged to her again. She had spent 75 years learning how to take care of everyone else. It had taken her this long to learn how to take care of herself. But she had learned it. And this Christmas, sitting in a home she had chosen, surrounded by people who had chosen her right back, Annie finally understood that it had never been too late to start over. It was, she thought, the best Christmas she had had in years. If this story moved you, do not forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories just like it. It really does help the channel grow, and it means more stories like Annie's find their way to people who need them.